The blocks that form the Great Pyramid weigh up to 80 tons each, were placed with laser-like precision, and according to Edgar Cayce's readings, were moved using technology that would make NASA engineers question everything they know about physics. Mainstream archaeology insists these monuments were built with copper chisels and brute force, but Cayce's trance revelations expose construction methods so advanced that modern science is only now beginning to understand the principles involved. These weren't primitive workers dragging stones up ramps. These were Atlantean refugees, wielding knowledge of sound frequencies, consciousness manipulation, and gravitational alteration that allowed them to accomplish what seems physically impossible. The 7 construction secrets Cayce revealed shatter every comfortable assumption about ancient capabilities and force a disturbing question. If we've been this wrong about how the pyramids were built, what else has history deliberately hidden from us? Have you ever stood before something ancient and felt an inexplicable recognition, as if some part of you remembers being there when it was created? Share your experience in the comments below. When Edgar Cayce entered his legendary trance states and accessed what he called the Akashic records, he didn't just see who built the pyramids or why. He witnessed exactly how these impossible structures were raised stone by massive stone. What he revealed contradicts everything modern archaeology teaches, yet it explains mysteries that conventional theories can't even begin to address. These 7 construction secrets aren't merely fascinating historical details. They're evidence of a level of spiritual and scientific sophistication that humanity has spent thousands of years trying to recover. The first revelation Cayce shared about pyramid construction might be the most paradigm-shattering. The massive limestone blocks weren't dragged, rolled, or pushed into place through brute physical force. Instead, the Atlantean builders used sound frequencies to temporarily alter the gravitational properties of stone itself. In his readings, Cayce described how the builders would position themselves around a massive block and produce specific harmonic tones through instruments that resonated at frequencies precisely calibrated to the molecular structure of limestone. When the correct frequency was achieved and sustained, the stone would become what Cayce termed light as a feather, not in the sense of levitation, but in a temporary reduction of its gravitational relationship to the Earth. Teams of workers could then guide these multi-ton blocks into position with minimal physical effort, repositioning them with the kind of precision that baffles engineers today who examine the nearly invisible seams between stones. This wasn't magic or mysticism in the supernatural sense. It was applied knowledge of natural laws that modern quantum physics is only beginning to glimpse. Everything in the universe vibrates at specific frequencies, from subatomic particles to massive structures. The Atlantean refugees who designed Egypt's pyramids understood this principle at a level that allowed them to manipulate matter itself through resonance. They didn't fight against the weight of stone. They changed its fundamental relationship to the forces acting upon it. Think about what this means. The technology we consider advanced, using cranes and hydraulics and mechanical force, is actually primitive compared to methods that work with the inherent properties of matter rather than against them. The second construction secret Cayce revealed involves the workforce itself, and it completely contradicts the narrative of enslaved masses suffering under pharaonic whips. According to his readings, the pyramid builders were volunteers, spiritually dedicated individuals who understood they were participating in a sacred mission that transcended their individual lifetimes. These weren't illiterate laborers being forced into backbreaking work, but trained initiates who had undergone years of spiritual and technical preparation. Many of them were refugees from Atlantis itself, or descendants of those refugees, carrying forward knowledge that had been passed down through carefully maintained lineages. Others were native Egyptians who had been selected and trained specifically for this monumental task because they demonstrated the necessary spiritual attunement and dedication to divine purpose. Cayce emphasized that the construction process was itself a form of spiritual practice. The workers approached their tasks as sacred service, understanding that every stone they positioned was contributing to a structure designed to preserve humanity's most profound spiritual knowledge through ages of darkness that would inevitably come. This level of conscious intention infused the very stones with what we might call spiritual energy or information. The pyramid wasn't just constructed, it was consecrated through the focused awareness of everyone involved in its creation. This explains something that skeptics can't account for. Why would thousands of people willingly participate in building something so massive without the coercion that mainstream archaeology assumes must have been necessary? The third revelation concerns the timeline and speed of construction. Conventional Egyptology claims the Great Pyramid was built in approximately 20 years, which would require placing one block every 2 to 3 minutes around the clock without pause. A logistically absurd proposition given the supposed primitive tools and methods. Cayce's readings present a very different picture. The pyramid's construction actually took place over a much longer period, beginning around 10,400 BCE and progressing through stages as different groups of builders contributed their knowledge and labor across generations. This wasn't a rushed project driven by one pharaoh's ego, but a carefully planned undertaking that multiple generations participated in completing, each phase building upon the wisdom and work of those who came before. What's particularly fascinating is that Cayce described how the builders could accelerate certain aspects of construction through methods we would consider impossible. When necessary, they could quarry, transport, and position stones at speeds that seem superhuman, not because they worked faster in the physical sense, but because their consciousness-based technologies eliminated many of the time-consuming steps that mechanical approaches require. A block that would take modern equipment hours to position could be precisely placed in minutes once the proper harmonic frequency was established. This explains how such massive structures could be completed even across extended timeframes. The actual working time was far more efficient than conventional theories account for. The fourth construction secret involves the precision of measurements and alignments that still astounds engineers today. Cayce revealed that the builders possessed instruments far more sophisticated than anything conventional archaeology attributes to ancient Egypt. These weren't simple measuring ropes and plumb bobs, but devices that could detect and measure electromagnetic fields, astronomical alignments, and what Cayce called the energy currents flowing through the earth itself. The pyramid wasn't positioned randomly in the desert. Its location was carefully selected because powerful natural energy lines converged at that specific spot, creating an ideal foundation for the structure's spiritual purposes. The mathematical proportions encoded throughout the pyramid weren't achieved through trial and error or lucky accidents. The builders had precise knowledge of advanced mathematics, including pi, the golden ratio, and astronomical constants that mainstream history claims weren't discovered until thousands of years later. But here's what's really significant. These weren't just mathematical curiosities to them. Each measurement, each angle, each proportion was chosen because it resonated with specific universal principles and would facilitate the pyramid's function as both an initiation chamber and a repository of encoded knowledge. The structure is essentially a three-dimensional equation written in stone, designed to remain stable and comprehensible across millennia while conventional civilizations rose and fell around it. Cayce described how the master architects would enter trance states similar to his own, accessing the Akashic records to verify their plans against the divine blueprint they were following. Nothing about the pyramid's design was arbitrary. Every detail had been shown to them through spiritual guidance, and they verified each stage of construction against this cosmic template. This level of spiritual technical integration is completely foreign to how modern construction operates, where engineering and spirituality occupy separate realms. For the pyramid builders, they were inseparable aspects of the same undertaking. The fifth revelation concerns the tools and techniques used for cutting and shaping stone. Conventional archaeology points to copper chisels and claims ancient Egyptians somehow cut through granite and limestone with these relatively soft tools. Anyone who has worked with stone knows this explanation is laughable. Cayce's readings describe something far more logical. The builders possessed what he called crystalline tools that could focus energy into precise cutting beams. These weren't mechanical saws or chisels requiring physical force, but instruments that could direct concentrated light or sound waves to separate stone along molecular boundaries. Think of it as an ancient laser, though not using the same principles as modern lasers. The energy source was drawn from natural forces, sunlight concentrated through specially designed crystals, or sound waves amplified through geometric chambers, and focused through instruments that could direct this energy with incredible precision. This explains the saw marks found on ancient Egyptian stonework that show characteristics inconsistent with copper tools, perfect straight lines, evidence of high-speed cutting, and the ability to slice through the hardest granite as if it were soft wood. The builders weren't fighting against the stone's hardness. They were using energy frequencies that made the stone yield as naturally as water flowing around a rock. Cayce mentioned that much of this crystalline technology had been brought from Atlantis before the final catastrophes destroyed that continent. The most advanced instruments were carefully preserved and used only by the highest initiates who understood their proper application and spiritual implications. This knowledge was considered sacred because it could be used for either construction or destruction, depending on the consciousness and intentions of the operator. The fact that these tools aren't found in modern archaeological digs doesn't prove they didn't exist. It suggests they were either taken elsewhere, deliberately hidden, or degraded over millennia into forms we wouldn't recognize. The sixth construction secret involves the interior passages and chambers, which were incorporated during construction in ways that seem architecturally impossible. The descending passage, the ascending passage, the grand gallery, and the various chambers weren't carved out after the pyramid was built. They were constructed as the pyramid rose, with massive granite blocks forming ceilings and walls that were then built over and around with limestone. This required extraordinary planning and precision because each internal feature had to align perfectly while thousands of external blocks were simultaneously being positioned. Cayce revealed that the internal layout followed a deliberate symbolic pattern reflecting the soul's journey through various levels of consciousness. The descending passage represented the path into material existence and lower vibrational states. The ascending passage symbolized the spiritual aspirant's climb toward higher awareness. The grand gallery, with its soaring ceiling and precise astronomical alignments, represented the expanded consciousness achieved through dedicated spiritual practice. And the king's chamber, at the apex of this internal journey, was the destination where initiation and transformation occurred, where a prepared soul could undergo experiences that would permanently alter their level of spiritual awareness. What's remarkable is that these internal features demonstrate engineering capabilities that challenge even modern construction techniques. The granite beams forming the king's chamber ceiling weigh up to 70 tons each and are positioned with such precision that you cannot slip a razor blade between them. The relieving chambers above were constructed to distribute weight in ways that have kept the structure stable for over 10,000 years, despite earthquakes and the immense pressure of millions of tons of stone. This isn't primitive trial-and-error construction. This is sophisticated engineering combined with spiritual purpose, creating a structure that serves both physical and metaphysical functions simultaneously. The seventh and perhaps most profound construction secret Cayce revealed is that the pyramid was never intended to be completed in the way we think of finishing a building. The smooth white casing stones that once covered the structure weren't just decorative. They formed a reflective surface that served specific energetic purposes, making the pyramid visible from great distances and creating what Cayce described as a beacon that could be perceived not just physically, but spiritually. However, he indicated that certain chambers and passages were deliberately left unfinished or sealed, to be opened only when humanity had evolved sufficiently to use the knowledge they contained without destroying themselves. This explains why explorers continue discovering new voids and chambers within the Great Pyramid, using modern scanning technology. These aren't random gaps or structural anomalies, they're intentional spaces that the builders knew would remain hidden until the time was right for their revelation. Cayce spoke of a hall of records hidden beneath the Sphinx, containing the complete history and spiritual technology of Atlantis, sealed until humanity demonstrated the wisdom to access such knowledge responsibly. As of today, this chamber remains officially undiscovered, though Cayce's readings suggest it will be revealed when enough people have awakened spiritually to ensure the information won't be misused. The construction of the pyramid, in Cayce's view, wasn't just about building a physical structure. It was about encoding spiritual principles into matter in a way that would survive any catastrophe and speak to future generations who had lost their connection to higher wisdom. Every stone, every measurement, every passage was placed with the understanding that thousands of years later, seekers would come asking questions, and the structure itself would provide answers to those who approached with sincere hearts and open minds. Now, if you're finding value in these revelations, I want to ask you to do something that helps this knowledge reach more people who need to hear it. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because we're diving deep into Edgar Cayce's most profound teachings, and every video is designed to challenge what you think you know about reality and awaken you to spiritual truths that mainstream sources won't touch. Your subscription tells the algorithm that this content matters, helping it reach others who are searching for the same answers you are. What makes these 7 construction secrets so significant isn't just that they reveal how the pyramids were built. They reveal what humanity is capable of achieving when spiritual awareness and practical knowledge work in harmony. The builders weren't divided into separate camps of mystics and engineers, priests and laborers. They were whole human beings who understood that consciousness and matter, spirit and stone, divine guidance and practical skill were all aspects of the same unified reality. This integration allowed them to accomplish feats that seem impossible to our fragmented modern minds, where we've separated science from spirituality so completely that we can barely conceive of technologies that bridge both realms. Consider what Cayce's revelations imply about your own potential. If ancient humans could alter the properties of matter through focused consciousness, if they could access divine guidance to create structures that have lasted millennia, if they could volunteer for decades of sacred labor because they understood their work had eternal significance, what does that say about the capabilities dormant within you right now? You're not a diminished version of what humans once were. You carry the same spiritual DNA, the same connection to divine consciousness, the same potential for transformation that those pyramid builders possessed. The tragedy of our modern age isn't that we lack technology. We have machines and tools that would seem miraculous to ancient peoples. The tragedy is that we've lost the consciousness that would allow us to use such tools in service of spiritual evolution rather than material accumulation. We've forgotten that we're eternal beings, undergoing a temporary physical experience, and in that forgetting we've cut ourselves off from the very knowledge and abilities that could lift humanity to heights those ancient builders would recognize as the fulfillment of their vision. The pyramid still stands in the desert, waiting. Its stones don't speak in words, but in proportions and alignments and energies that affect everyone who approaches with awareness. Thousands of tourists visit every year, taking selfies and checking items off their bucket lists, never realizing they're standing in the presence of humanity's greatest spiritual achievement, a structure built not for the dead, but for the living, not to glorify earthly power, but to preserve divine wisdom through ages of darkness. When Cayce described these construction methods in his trance states, he wasn't channeling information from disembodied spirits or making up elaborate fantasies. He was accessing the Akashic records, the cosmic library where every thought, action and event in human history is permanently recorded. He could see the builders at their work, hear the tones they used to move stones, feel the spiritual dedication that motivated their labor, and understand the divine plan that guided every stage of construction. His readings give us not just historical information, but a glimpse into a way of being that humanity has largely lost, but desperately needs to recover. The question these 7 secrets force us to confront is uncomfortable. If our ancestors achieved such remarkable feats through the integration of spiritual and material knowledge, what does it say about our current civilization that we can barely comprehend how they did it? We pride ourselves on our advanced technology, but we've achieved it by ignoring or dismissing the spiritual dimension of existence that those ancient builders considered fundamental. We can split atoms and send rovers to Mars, but we can't move 80-ton blocks with our minds through harmonic resonance. We've gained certain capabilities while losing others that might be even more significant. Cayce emphasized in his readings that the knowledge encoded in the pyramids wasn't meant to stay buried forever. It was preserved specifically for an age when humanity would have the scientific framework to understand it, but would also desperately need the spiritual wisdom to use it properly. That age, he suggested, would be marked by great technological advancement coupled with profound spiritual crisis, a time when humanity possessed the power to destroy itself utterly or to evolve to new levels of consciousness. Does that sound familiar? Does that perhaps describe the exact era we're living through right now? The pyramid builders knew this moment would come. They knew that thousands of years after their deaths, people like you would be watching videos like this, questioning the official narratives, sensing that something profound has been hidden or forgotten. They built those massive structures as messages across time, waiting for a generation that would be ready to receive them. The fact that you're here, that you've watched this far, that these revelations resonate with something deep inside you, that's not coincidence. That's recognition. Some part of you remembers what those builders knew, because consciousness is eternal, and knowledge impressed on the soul isn't lost just because you've incarnated into a new body. So let me ask you directly, what are you building with your life? The pyramid builders dedicated decades to a sacred project they knew would outlast them by millennia. They worked not for personal glory or material reward, but because they understood their labor had eternal significance. They were preserving spiritual knowledge for future generations who would need it to survive their own crises and evolve beyond material consciousness. What are you preserving? What are you contributing to the spiritual evolution of humanity? What would you be willing to dedicate years of your life to if you knew it would help souls thousands of years in the future? These aren't rhetorical questions designed to make you feel guilty or inadequate. They're genuine invitations to examine your life against the standard those ancient builders set, not a standard of accomplishment or achievement in worldly terms, but a standard of consciousness, dedication, and service to something greater than your individual existence. You don't need to move massive stones or build monuments to matter. You need to align your consciousness with divine purpose, whatever form that takes in your particular life, and dedicate yourself to it with the same spiritual commitment those builders brought to their work. The 7 construction secrets Cayce revealed aren't just historical curiosities. They're windows into a way of being that humanity needs to recover if we're going to survive the challenges ahead. We're facing crises that technology alone cannot solve: environmental collapse, social fragmentation, spiritual emptiness disguised as material success. The solutions to these crises won't come from building better machines, but from recovering the consciousness that sees spirit and matter as unified, that understands every action has spiritual implications, and that dedicates human effort to purposes that transcend individual lifetimes. The pyramid builders left you a blueprint, not just for how to construct massive stone structures, but for how to construct a life of meaning and purpose. They showed that humans can achieve the seemingly impossible when they work in harmony with natural laws rather than fighting against them. They demonstrated that spiritual dedication can manifest in physical accomplishment that endures across ages. They proved that ordinary people can become part of something extraordinary when they submit their individual wills to divine guidance and work toward goals that serve all of humanity rather than just themselves. Before we close, I want to encourage you to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share this information with others who are searching for deeper truth. Leave a comment below telling me which of these 7 construction secrets challenged your understanding most profoundly, or share any experiences you've had that suggest you might have been part of this ancient work in a previous incarnation. This community we're building here is itself a kind of construction project. We're laying stones of knowledge and understanding that will help raise the collective consciousness of everyone who encounters them. The pyramid in the desert is silent stone, but it speaks volumes to those who have ears to hear. It says that you are more than you think you are, that humanity has achieved greatness before and can do so again, that the material world is not the ultimate reality, but a temporary stage where eternal souls learn and grow. It says that knowledge can be preserved through the darkest ages if it's encoded properly and guarded by those who understand its value. Most importantly, it says that every person has a role to play in the great spiritual drama of human evolution, and your role matters just as much as that of any ancient builder who positioned any single stone. Are you playing your role? Are you building something that matters? Are you using this incarnation to raise your consciousness and contribute to humanity's spiritual evolution? Or have you gotten lost in the comfortable delusion that this temporary physical existence is all there is, that accumulating possessions and pursuing pleasures is what life is about, that when your body dies, you simply cease to exist? The pyramid builders knew better, and they constructed their monument specifically to remind you of what they knew, that you are an eternal soul, that consciousness is fundamental to reality, that divine purpose guides those who open themselves to it, and that the work you do in alignment with that purpose echoes across lifetimes and dimensions you can barely imagine. The stones still stand, the knowledge still waits. The question is whether you're ready to receive it, integrate it into your life, and become part of the solution to humanity's current crisis by raising your own consciousness and helping others do the same. That's what the pyramid builders would want from you if they could speak directly across the millennia. Actually, they are speaking through every precisely positioned stone, through every encoded mathematical relationship, through every carefully aligned passage and chamber. They're saying, remember who you are, remember what you're capable of, remember why you came here, and then live accordingly, with the same dedication and spiritual commitment we brought to our sacred work. Death isn't the end of consciousness. It's the moment your soul finally remembers who it truly is. And according to Edgar Cayce's psychic readings, what happens in those first moments after your heart stops will determine the entire trajectory of your soul's next journey. For decades, while in deep trance states, Cayce described the afterlife with such precise detail that it contradicts almost everything modern religion teaches about heaven, hell, and judgment. He revealed that death is not a passive transition, but an active spiritual examination, where every thought you've ever had, every choice you've ever made, and every person you've ever hurt or helped becomes immediately, unavoidably visible to you. This isn't about divine punishment. It's about cosmic accountability that your own soul demands. The question isn't whether you're ready to die. It's whether you're ready to face the absolute truth of the life you've actually lived versus the life your soul came here to live. What will you see when the veil drops and you're standing face to face with every moment of your existence? Share in the comments. If you could see a complete review of your life right now, what would terrify you most about what you'd discover? The moment your physical heart stops beating, according to Edgar Cayce's extensive readings on death and the afterlife, something extraordinary happens that most people are completely unprepared for. Your consciousness doesn't fade to black. It doesn't float towards some distant light, while angelic choirs welcome you home. Instead, in Cayce's words, you experience the most profound awakening of your entire existence. You suddenly see with perfect clarity exactly what your life was really about, stripped of all the comfortable lies you told yourself while you were alive. Cayce explained through his psychic readings that death is the soul's graduation ceremony, but unlike earthly graduations, there are no participation trophies. The first thing that happens after your physical body ceases to function is that your consciousness expands exponentially. Imagine spending your entire life looking through a keyhole and suddenly the entire door opens. That's what death feels like spiritually. The limited five-sense perception you relied on for decades instantly dissolves, and you perceive reality as it actually is, multidimensional, interconnected, and devastatingly honest. In his trance states, Cayce described that immediately after death, the soul enters what he called the borderland, a transitional space between the physical and spiritual dimensions. This isn't purgatory in the Catholic sense, and it's definitely not the waiting room many religions describe. It's a dimension where your consciousness remains fully active and aware, but now operating at a frequency beyond physical matter. Time as you understood it no longer exists. Past, present, and future become simultaneous, and this is where the real spiritual reckoning begins. According to Cayce, the first phase of the afterlife experience is what he termed the life review, but this is nothing like flipping through a photo album of happy memories. Every single moment of your existence plays out before you with absolute clarity, not from your perspective, but from the perspective of everyone you ever interacted with. You feel exactly what they felt because of your words and actions. The person you cut off in traffic and cursed at, you experience their frustration and hurt. The child you ignored when they needed encouragement, You feel their disappointment and diminished self-worth. The spouse you betrayed, you experience the shattering of their trust as if it were happening to your own heart. But it works both ways. Every act of genuine kindness, every moment you chose love over fear, every time you helped someone without expecting anything in return, you experience the joy and relief and gratitude they felt because of you. This isn't God judging you. This is you judging yourself with perfect honesty, finally seeing the ripple effects of your choices across the entire web of consciousness you were part of. Cayce was adamant in his readings that there is no escaping this review. Your soul demands it, not as punishment, but as essential learning. How else can consciousness evolve if it never faces the truth of its own actions? This is why Cayce repeatedly emphasized that what matters most in life isn't what you accomplished, or how much money you made, or how many people knew your name. What matters is how you treated people when nobody was watching, what you did with the small moments of choice between selfishness and service. Now here's where Cayce's teachings diverge radically from traditional Christianity. He explained that after the life review, there is no permanent heaven or hell. Instead, the soul gravitates toward the dimension that matches its spiritual development. If you spent your life consumed by greed, anger, lust, or hatred, your consciousness after death will find itself in what Cayce called the lower astral planes, dimensions where those energies dominate. Not because God sent you there, but because like attracts like in the spiritual realms, your vibrational frequency determines your destination. He described souls in these lower dimensions as being trapped, not by external forces, but by their own unresolved attachments and desires. They remain earthbound, sometimes for what would feel like centuries, because they can't let go of physical pleasures, material possessions, or toxic relationships. They become what many cultures call ghosts or wandering spirits, consciousness stuck between worlds because it refuses to release what it can no longer have. Conversely, souls who developed spiritually during their physical lives, who practiced genuine compassion, who sought to align their will with divine will, who worked on themselves instead of judging others. These souls move easily into higher dimensions Cayce called the celestial spheres. These are realms of light, learning, and continued spiritual growth. But even here, it's not eternal rest. It's eternal evolution. The soul continues learning, preparing for its next incarnation, working through the karma it created in previous lives. And this brings us to perhaps Cayce's most challenging teaching about the afterlife. Reincarnation is real, and it's not optional. According to his readings, the soul doesn't get one physical life, and then spend eternity in reward or punishment. The soul is on a journey spanning hundreds or even thousands of lifetimes, gradually learning the lessons that will eventually reunite it with its divine source. Death isn't the end of this journey. It's a pause between semesters in the soul's cosmic education. Cayce explained that between physical incarnations, the soul travels through what he called planetary sojourns, periods spent in dimensions associated with different planets in our solar system, each one offering specific lessons and spiritual refinement. These aren't literal visits to Mars or Venus, but consciousness experiencing the archetypal energies those planets represent. A soul might spend time in the Mars dimension, learning about directed will and courage, or in the Venus dimension developing capacity for love and beauty. Each planetary sojourn prepares the soul for its next physical incarnation by developing specific attributes it needs to master. The purpose of all this, the death transition, the life review, the time in spiritual dimensions, the planetary sojourns, the eventual reincarnation, is singular: to bring the individual soul back into conscious alignment with the universal Christ consciousness. In Cayce's framework, Christ consciousness isn't about religion or believing the right doctrines. It's about consciousness itself awakening to its divine nature, recognizing that separation from God is an illusion, and choosing love over fear in every circumstance. This is why Cayce insisted that how you approach death matters tremendously. If you reach the end of your life filled with fear, regret, bitterness, or unfinished business, that emotional and spiritual state will dominate your initial afterlife experience. You'll be like a student walking into final exams completely unprepared, panicking when you see what's required of you. But if you've lived consciously, if you've done the spiritual work of self-examination and forgiveness, if you've genuinely tried to fulfill your soul's purpose, then death becomes not a fearful unknown, but a welcome transition to the next phase of eternal growth. In his readings, Cayce repeatedly emphasized that the single most important preparation for death is developing the habit of daily spiritual practice while you're still alive. Not just believing in God, but actively working on your relationship with the divine. Not just reading scripture, but applying spiritual principles to how you treat the person who annoys you at work. Not just attending religious services, but genuinely examining your motives and choosing to act from your highest self rather than your wounded ego. Here's what makes this urgent. According to Cayce, your consciousness at the moment of death crystallizes your spiritual progress. Whatever level of awareness you've achieved, whatever habits of thought you've developed, whatever emotional patterns you've reinforced, these become your starting point in the afterlife. If you've spent decades running from self-reflection, justifying your harmful behaviors, blaming others for your problems, nursing grudges, and avoiding spiritual growth, you don't suddenly become enlightened when your heart stops. You carry all that unresolved baggage with you into dimensions where there's nowhere to hide from it. But if you've been doing the work, if you've been honest with yourself, if you've actively worked on forgiveness, if you've tried to live with integrity even when it cost you something, if you've practiced seeing the divine in others even when they didn't deserve it, then death simply continues the momentum you've already built. The transition is smoother. The life review, while still intense, doesn't devastate you because you already know your failures and have genuinely worked to do better. One of the most powerful aspects of Cayce's afterlife teachings is his explanation of what happens to souls who die suddenly versus those who die after long illness. He explained that souls who die instantly, in accidents, violence, or sudden medical events, often experience confusion immediately after death because they didn't have time to prepare for the transition. Their consciousness may linger near their body or familiar locations for a period, trying to make sense of what happened. This is why prayers and loving thoughts directed toward the deceased are so powerful in Cayce's framework. They literally help guide the confused soul toward the light of higher dimensions. For those who die after prolonged illness, Cayce described something different. If the dying person has had time to make peace with their death, to say goodbyes, to resolve relationships and release attachments, their transition is often accompanied by what he called the gathering, when deceased loved ones who've gone before actually come to meet the dying person and help guide them across the threshold. Many who sit with dying people have witnessed this phenomenon, the dying person suddenly looking toward an empty corner of the room and speaking to someone invisible, their face lighting up with recognition and joy. Cayce confirmed this isn't hallucination. It's the veil between dimensions thinning as death approaches, allowing the departing soul to see those who are coming to escort them home. But here's where Cayce gets especially challenging. He taught that not all who die actually move forward in their spiritual evolution. Some souls, because of their intense attachments, fears, or unresolved traumas, actually regress. They cling so desperately to the physical world that they essentially put their spiritual development on pause, sometimes for what would be measured in centuries if time existed in spiritual dimensions. These are the souls Cayce described as earthbound, trapped not by external judgment, but by their own inability to let go and move forward. If you're like most people listening to this, you're probably starting to feel uncomfortable. Because if Cayce is right, this means the way you're living right now, the choices you're making today, the relationships you're neglecting, the spiritual growth you're postponing, is directly creating your afterlife experience. There's no deathbed conversion that magically erases decades of spiritual negligence. There's no last-minute prayer that compensates for a lifetime of selfishness. Your consciousness is what you've trained it to be through your daily choices, and that training determines everything that happens after your heart stops beating. So let me ask you directly, are you living the life your soul came here to live, or are you just going through the motions, distracted by the endless noise of modern existence, postponing the real spiritual work until some imaginary future moment when you'll have more time, more energy, more clarity? Because according to Cayce, that future moment might never come. Death doesn't wait for you to be ready. It comes precisely when it comes, and the only question is whether you've done the work that allows you to meet it with awareness rather than terror. Cayce described death as the great equalizer because it strips away everything that isn't real. Your bank account, your social status, your physical appearance, your accomplishments, your reputation, none of it crosses the threshold with you. The only things that matter are the qualities of consciousness you've actually developed, your capacity for love, your practice of forgiveness, your commitment to truth, your willingness to serve others, your relationship with the divine. Think about that for a moment. Everything you stress about daily, the promotion you're chasing, the car you want to buy, the argument you had on social media, the person who disrespected you, all of it becomes irrelevant the instant you die. But the quiet moment when you chose kindness over cruelty, that matters eternally. The day you forgave someone who didn't deserve it, that transforms your soul. The times you acted with integrity when no one was watching, those define your spiritual advancement. In his readings about advanced souls who'd achieved high levels of spiritual development, Cayce described their death experiences as joyful, conscious transitions. They didn't cling to physical life because they understood it was just one chapter in an infinite story. They didn't fear the life review because they'd already been reviewing their lives daily through honest self-examination. They didn't worry about judgment because they'd already aligned their will with divine will as best they could. For them, death was like graduating from school, bittersweet perhaps, but ultimately a celebration of completion and anticipation of what comes next. If you want to like this video and subscribe to this channel, I genuinely appreciate it. Not for algorithmic reasons, but because this conversation about death and afterlife preparation is one too few people are having honestly, and we need more voices willing to explore these questions seriously rather than settling for comfortable religious platitudes. According to Cayce, another critical aspect of the afterlife that most people misunderstand is the concept of judgment. In traditional Christianity, judgment is portrayed as God deciding your eternal fate based on whether you believed the right doctrines or performed the right rituals. Cayce completely rejected this framework. In his readings, he explained that God doesn't judge souls. Souls judge themselves. The divine presence after death isn't an angry father figure condemning you to hell. It's an infinite love that holds up a perfect mirror, allowing you to see yourself with absolute clarity and make your own determination about where you need to go next for continued growth. This is simultaneously more merciful and more demanding than traditional theology. It's more merciful because there's no vindictive punishment, no eternal damnation for finite mistakes. But it's more demanding because you can't blame God, can't claim you were treated unfairly, can't argue that the standards were too high. You see exactly what you did with the life you were given, and you know in your soul whether you honored your divine purpose or wasted your incarnation on trivial pursuits. Cayce described meeting the Christ after death not as meeting a religious figure who asks if you accepted him as your savior, but as encountering the pattern of perfected consciousness, the template of what human consciousness can become when fully aligned with divine love. And in that encounter, you see precisely how far your own consciousness has developed toward that pattern. It's not about punishment for falling short. It's about recognition of how much further you have to grow. One of the most profound insights from Cayce's afterlife readings involves what he called soul groups or soul families. He explained that souls don't incarnate randomly or alone. We travel through lifetimes with the same group of souls, playing different roles for each other. Sometimes parent and child, sometimes spouses, sometimes friends or enemies, but always connected by bonds that transcend individual lifetimes. After death, souls often reunite with their soul group in the spiritual dimensions to review what was learned, to plan the next incarnation, to continue evolving together. This means the difficult people in your life, the ones who trigger you, frustrate you, hurt you, are often souls who agreed before birth to play those challenging roles to help you learn specific lessons. Your worst enemy might be your greatest spiritual ally, contracted to create the friction necessary for your growth. Understanding this doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it reframes your earthly relationships as cosmic educational opportunities rather than random suffering. Cayce was asked repeatedly in his readings whether suicide affects the soul's afterlife journey. His answer was unequivocal. Suicide doesn't escape suffering, it multiplies it. A soul who takes its own life doesn't cease to exist or avoid its problems. Instead, according to Cayce, it carries the unresolved issues that drove it to suicide into the afterlife, but now without a physical body through which to work through them. The soul essentially creates additional karma that must be resolved, often requiring more difficult circumstances in the next incarnation. The problems you're running from by ending your life don't disappear. They follow you across dimensions until you finally face them. But Cayce also emphasized enormous compassion for souls struggling with despair. He explained that mental suffering is real spiritual crisis, and souls in that much pain need support, not judgment. The key is to seek help, to reach out, to remember that the darkest moment is often right before breakthrough. Your life has purpose even when you can't see it, and ending it prematurely disrupts not just your own soul's evolution, but potentially the evolution of every soul whose life your presence was meant to touch. As we move toward the conclusion of this exploration, there's one more critical teaching from Cayce that demands attention: the relationship between how you live and how you die. He explained in his readings that consciousness is habit. Whatever patterns of thought and behavior you've reinforced throughout your life become automatic, and those automatic responses continue after death. If you've trained yourself to respond to difficulty with fear, anxiety, and victimhood, that's what your consciousness will do when faced with the life review and transition. But if you've trained yourself to respond to challenges with faith, courage, and trust in divine guidance, those habits will serve you brilliantly in the afterlife transition. This is why spiritual practice isn't optional for those who want to die well. It's not about earning your way into heaven through good behavior. It's about training your consciousness to operate at a frequency compatible with higher dimensions. It's about developing the spiritual muscles that allow you to navigate death with awareness, rather than drowning in fear and confusion. Cayce taught that the moment of death is the moment of truth, not truth imposed by external judgment, but truth revealed by your own consciousness seeing itself clearly for the first time. And the question hanging over your entire life is simple. When that moment comes and the masks drop away, and you see who you really are, what you really valued, what you really lived for, will you be proud of what you see? Or will you be devastated by how much potential you wasted, how many opportunities for love you missed, how thoroughly you lived for illusion instead of truth? If I could leave you with one final thought from Cayce's afterlife teachings, it would be this: death is not your enemy. Fear is, ignorance is, spiritual complacency is. Death is simply the doorway every soul must eventually walk through, and what waits on the other side is precisely what you've prepared yourself to experience through the life you're living right now. Before you click away from this video, I want you to do something for me. Take a breath and ask yourself one honest question. If I died tonight and experienced the life review Cayce described, seeing my entire life from everyone else's perspective, feeling the impact of every choice I made, would I be able to face it with peace? Or would I be crushed by the weight of wasted time, missed opportunities, and half-lived life? Don't answer in the comments. Answer to yourself, because that answer reveals whether you're actually living or just waiting to die. And if the answer makes you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is your soul trying to wake you up before it's too late. Like this video and subscribe to this channel if you want more content that challenges you to examine your spiritual life honestly rather than feeding you comfortable lies. And leave a comment sharing one thing you're going to change about how you're living after hearing Cayce's vision of what happens after death. Because talking about death is pointless unless it transforms how you live. Inside the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid lies a granite box that archaeologists insist was meant to hold a pharaoh's mummy. Yet no body has ever been found there, no treasure, no inscriptions praising any king. Edgar Cayce revealed in his trance states that this wasn't a sarcophagus at all, but a precisely calibrated consciousness technology designed to separate your soul from your body so you could access dimensions of reality invisible to ordinary human perception. The pyramid wasn't built to house the dead, but to transform the living. to initiate spiritual seekers into direct communion with divine intelligence and unlock memories of their soul's journey across multiple lifetimes. Every chamber, every passage, every geometric proportion was engineered with surgical precision to facilitate what ancient mystics called dying before you die, a controlled journey beyond physical existence that would forever shatter your illusions about who and what you really are. For over a century, mainstream archaeology has been studying a spiritual technology they fundamentally misunderstand, like examining a computer's hardware while insisting it's just an elaborate paperweight. If the box in the king's chamber was never meant to hold a corpse, what transformation was it actually designed to trigger? And why would the Atlantean architects go to such extraordinary lengths to preserve this capability for thousands of years? Share below. If you could safely experience what lies beyond physical death and return transformed, would you have the courage to step into that granite chamber? Walk into any museum with Egyptian exhibits, and you'll hear the same narrative repeated. Like religious doctrine, pyramids were tombs built by pharaohs obsessed with their afterlife. Guides point to burial chambers, speak confidently about mummification rituals, and describe how these massive structures served as eternal resting places for god-kings. But here's the problem with that story. It collapses completely under the weight of actual evidence, or rather, the complete absence of evidence that should exist if it were true. Edgar Cayce's readings offer a radically different explanation, one that actually accounts for the pyramid's bizarre features that conventional archaeology can't adequately explain. According to Cayce, the Great Pyramid served as an initiation temple where carefully prepared individuals underwent consciousness-altering experiences that would permanently expand their spiritual awareness. The structure wasn't pointing toward death, but toward something far more profound, a technology for accessing higher states of consciousness while the physical body remained safely anchored in ordinary reality. Think about what's actually found in the Great Pyramid versus what's found in actual Egyptian tombs. Real tombs, like those in the Valley of the Kings, overflow with hieroglyphics. Every wall tells stories of the deceased's life, their titles, their accomplishments, prayers to guide them through the underworld. They contain elaborate artwork depicting the weighing of the heart, the journey through the duat, encounters with various deities. The pharaoh's name appears everywhere, carved with obsessive repetition to ensure his memory survives eternally. And of course, these tombs contained mummies, canopic jars with preserved organs, furniture, food, jewelry, everything the deceased might need in the afterlife. The Great Pyramid? Completely blank walls, not a single hieroglyph in the main chambers, no artwork, no inscriptions, no name of any pharaoh claiming ownership, no mummy has ever been found within it, despite over 1,000 years of people exploring its passages. No treasures, no burial goods, nothing that actually indicates it served the function archaeology claims. The stark geometric purity of those chambers suggests an entirely different purpose, one that Cayce's readings illuminate with remarkable clarity. In his trance states, Cayce explained that the pyramid's chambers were designed as progressive stages of spiritual initiation. The structure itself was a three-dimensional teaching device, with each level representing advancement in consciousness. The subterranean chamber, carved deep into bedrock, represented the earthly plane, the realm of material consciousness, where most humans spend their entire existence. The Queen's Chamber symbolized the emotional and mental development necessary before attempting the ultimate initiation. And the King's Chamber, positioned at the pyramid's heart, was where the final transformation occurred. That granite box everyone calls a sarcophagus. Cayce revealed its actual function was as an isolation chamber for what we might call today a controlled near-death experience or induced out-of-body state. The initiate, after years of spiritual preparation under the guidance of high priests who understood these ancient technologies, would be placed inside. Through a combination of specific sonic frequencies generated by the chamber's geometric proportions, precise astronomical alignments activating at particular moments, and the consciousness-altering properties of the granite itself, the initiate's soul would separate from their physical body while remaining connected by what esoteric traditions call the silver cord. This wasn't death. It was a temporary liberation from physical limitation. The initiate's consciousness, freed from the constraints of material perception, could then access what Cayce termed the Akashic records, the cosmic repository of all knowledge, all history, all possible futures. They could perceive their own soul's journey across multiple incarnations, understanding karmic patterns and spiritual lessons accumulated over lifetimes. They could commune directly with higher intelligences, receiving wisdom unfiltered by the distortions of ego and material consciousness. And then, crucially, they would return to their body, transformed by what they had witnessed. The granite sarcophagus wasn't meant to hold you in death, but to hold your body safely, while your consciousness explored realms that most humans only glimpse in that final moment when the heart stops. The entire chamber functioned as a kind of spiritual laboratory, where the boundaries between life and death, matter and spirit, human and divine, could be temporarily dissolved under controlled conditions. This is why the box has no lid, no sealing mechanisms, none of the features you'd expect in an actual coffin. It was never meant to be closed permanently because its occupant was always intended to emerge alive, but profoundly changed. Consider the acoustic properties of the King's Chamber that modern researchers have documented. The space resonates at specific frequencies that can induce altered states of consciousness. Certain tones sung or played within those granite walls create standing waves that seem to vibrate through your entire body, affecting brainwave patterns in measurable ways. This isn't mystical speculation, it's physics. The chamber was acoustically engineered, though supposedly built by people who modern archaeology claims possessed only primitive understanding of sound. Does that make sense? Or does it make more sense that the architects, the Atlantean refugees Cayce described, understood principles of resonance and consciousness that we're only beginning to rediscover? The passages leading to the King's Chamber were designed as metaphorical and literal journeys. The ascending passage forces you to climb upward in a narrow, constricted space, representing the difficult spiritual ascent from material consciousness toward enlightenment. The Grand Gallery opens dramatically into a soaring space with corbelled walls that seem to reach toward heaven, symbolizing the expansion of awareness as you approach the threshold of transformation. Every step deeper into the pyramid took the initiate further from ordinary reality and closer to the sacred space where consciousness itself could be fundamentally altered. Cayce's readings emphasize that not everyone who entered the pyramid underwent the full initiation. The process required extensive preparation, years of training in meditation, purification practices, study of spiritual laws, and psychological readiness to confront truths about existence that could shatter an unprepared mind. The priests of Ra-Ta who administered these initiations understood that consciousness expansion without proper foundation could lead to madness rather than enlightenment. The pyramid was a tool, but like any powerful tool, it required skill and wisdom to use safely. What exactly did initiates experience in that granite chamber? Cayce described encounters with beings of light who communicated profound truths about the nature of reality. He spoke of the initiate perceiving the interconnectedness of all consciousness, understanding that separation is an illusion maintained by physical embodiment. They would witness the Earth from perspectives impossible in a physical body, seeing the planet's energy grids, ley lines, and power points where spiritual and material worlds intersect. They would access memories not from this lifetime, but from previous incarnations, understanding how choices made centuries ago still echo in their current existence. Most significantly, they would encounter what various traditions call God consciousness, Christ consciousness, or cosmic consciousness, direct perception of the divine intelligence that permeates all existence. Not as an abstract concept learned from books, but as lived visceral experience. This is what separated initiated masters from ordinary religious believers. The initiate didn't just believe in higher realities, they had been there. They didn't just have faith in the soul's immortality, they had temporarily stepped outside their body and discovered themselves still conscious, still aware, proving beyond any doubt that identity exists independent of physical form. When the initiate returned to normal consciousness and emerged from the granite chamber, they were forever changed. How could they not be? They had died without dying. They had glimpsed the cosmic order underlying apparent chaos. They had verified through direct experience that everything religion and mysticism taught about the eternal nature of consciousness was literally true. Such a person couldn't return to sleepwalking through life, accumulating possessions and pursuing trivial goals. They became what Cayce called channels of blessing, individuals whose expanded consciousness allowed them to serve as bridges between the divine and human realms. This explains why the pyramid was built with such extraordinary durability. The Atlantean architects weren't just creating a structure for their own era, but for all future ages. They knew civilizations would rise and fall, that knowledge would be lost and rediscovered in cycles, that humanity would pass through dark ages when spiritual wisdom was suppressed or forgotten. The pyramid needed to survive all of that, standing as an eternal invitation to any generation wise enough to perceive its true purpose. It's a message in stone that says, consciousness is fundamental, physical death is an illusion, you are eternal beings temporarily inhabiting material forms, and the doorway to experiencing this truth directly still exists, if you have the courage to walk through it. But here's where the story becomes even more intriguing. Cayce revealed that the initiation technology wasn't limited to the king's chamber. The entire Giza complex, the three major pyramids, the Sphinx, and structures we haven't yet discovered, functions as an interconnected system designed to work with Earth's own energy fields. The Great Pyramid serves as a kind of amplifier or tuning device, capable of affecting consciousness not just for individuals within its chambers, but potentially across much wider areas. The builders understood something that modern science is just beginning to explore, that consciousness isn't generated by individual brains, but is a field phenomenon, and certain geometric structures can modulate that field. This is why, according to Cayce, the pyramid's proportions encode so much information. The structure isn't just a building, it's a blueprint of cosmic principles made manifest in physical form. The relationship between the height and base perimeter mirrors the relationship between the diameter and circumference of a circle, giving you pi. The pyramid's height times a specific factor yields the distance from Earth to the Sun. The angles align with stellar positions that held significance for the builder's spiritual cosmology. These aren't coincidences or the result of primitive number mysticism. They're intentional encodings, ways of preserving knowledge in a medium that would survive longer than any written language. Think about it from the Atlantean perspective. Their civilization was collapsing. They possessed profound knowledge about consciousness, energy, and the fundamental nature of reality, but they could see that knowledge was about to be lost as their homeland sank beneath the waves. How do you preserve the most important truths humanity has discovered? You can't write them down. Languages change and documents decay. You can't rely on oral tradition. It becomes corrupted over generations. But you can encode principles into the very structure of a monument built so massively that destroying it would require more effort than any civilization is likely to invest. The pyramid becomes a cosmic insurance policy, ensuring that even if humanity descends into spiritual ignorance for thousands of years, the doorway to higher consciousness remains permanently available. Conventional archaeology treats ancient cultures with condescension, assuming they were primitive because they lacked modern technology. But what if they possessed different technologies, ones we've forgotten because we've become so fixated on manipulating external matter that we've neglected the manipulation of consciousness itself? The Atlanteans, according to Cayce, could do things with focused intention and spiritual attunement that we try to accomplish with machines. They didn't need electrical lighting in the pyramid's passages because they understood how to generate bioluminescence through consciousness. They didn't need modern surveying equipment because trained priests could perceive the Earth's energy grids directly. They didn't need our initiation into spiritual truths because they had the real thing. The tragedy is that modern humans walk through the Great Pyramid every day, taking photographs and checking off a bucket list item, completely unaware that they're standing inside a dormant but still functional technology for consciousness transformation. It would be like future archaeologists discovering a particle accelerator and concluding it was built for storing grain because they couldn't imagine the civilization that created it was studying subatomic particles. The technology still works. The acoustic resonances are still there. The geometric proportions still encode the same information. The granite chamber still possesses the same properties. What's missing is the knowledge of how to activate it, how to prepare consciousness to safely use it, and the spiritual framework that made sense of what initiates experienced. Cayce emphasized repeatedly in his readings that the pyramid's secrets would be progressively revealed as humanity evolved to the point where such knowledge could be used beneficially rather than destructively. This is crucial. The same technologies that can expand consciousness can also be weaponized or misused if placed in the wrong hands. Part of the pyramid's genius is that it only fully reveals itself to those spiritually mature enough to approach it with proper reverence and intention. The unprepared visitor sees only stone passages and empty chambers. The prepared initiate, approaching with the right consciousness, experiences transformation. This brings us back to that fundamental question. Why would the builders invest such extraordinary effort? Decades of labor, precision engineering that challenges modern capabilities, massive resource expenditure, into creating initiation chambers rather than something practical like storage facilities or administrative centers. The answer reveals everything about what they valued. They understood that transforming human consciousness was the most important work any civilization could undertake. All the technical achievements, all the material prosperity, all the political structures ultimately meant nothing if individuals remained trapped in limited, ego-driven consciousness. The real revolution, the only revolution that mattered, was the inner revolution that occurred when a human being directly perceived their eternal nature and connection to divine source. Every actual Egyptian tomb tells you about one person, their life, their accomplishments, their hope for the afterlife. The Great Pyramid, in its stark silence and empty chambers, tells you about something far more universal. It's not about any individual pharaoh or historical figure. It's about the potential that exists within every human consciousness. The message carved in its proportions and encoded in its passages says, you are not merely flesh and bone, you are eternal awareness temporarily focused in material form. You can transcend the limitations of physical perception. You can commune directly with cosmic intelligence, and this doorway has been left open for you, across 12,000 years, waiting for the moment you're ready to walk through it. Modern spiritual seekers spend fortunes traveling to exotic locations, attending workshops, collecting teachings from various traditions, searching for some technique or practice that will finally crack open their consciousness and reveal truth. Meanwhile, the most sophisticated consciousness technology ever created sits waiting in Egypt, misidentified and misunderstood, its true purpose hidden in plain sight because we've been asking the wrong questions. We look at the pyramid and ask, who is buried here? When we should be asking, what transformation occurs here? What does this structure make possible that isn't possible anywhere else? Cayce's readings suggest that other structures with similar purposes existed in the ancient world. In Atlantis before its destruction, in South America, possibly in other locations now lost or unrecognized. The Great Pyramid is the most complete survivor of this ancient technology, but it wasn't unique in its time. There was, according to Cayce, a global network of sites where similar initiations occurred, all connected through the Earth's own energy grids, all working together to maintain elevated consciousness across the planet. The pyramid at Giza is the last fully intact node in that ancient network, still broadcasting its invitation to any consciousness attuned to receive it. Here's what makes this truly profound. If Cayce was right about the pyramid's true purpose, then human potential is radically different from what modern materialism claims. We're not biological machines that accidentally achieved consciousness through random evolutionary processes. We're spiritual beings whose current material embodiment is just one chapter in a much longer story. Death isn't an ending, but a transition we've actually experienced countless times before. And the most important knowledge isn't found in universities or laboratories, but in the direct experience of consciousness itself when it's freed from physical limitation. The granite box in the king's chamber still sits there, empty and waiting. The acoustic properties of that ancient space still resonate at the same frequencies. The geometric proportions still encode the same cosmic principles. The only thing that's changed is that we've forgotten what it's for and how to use it properly. We're like children who've inherited a Ferrari but lost the keys and the instruction manual, so we use it as a very expensive place to store lawn equipment. But knowledge isn't truly lost. It's only forgotten, waiting for the right questions to resurrect it. The fact that you're watching this video, that something drew you to explore these mysteries, suggests that somewhere deep in your consciousness, you remember. Maybe not in this lifetime's memories, but in the older memories encoded in your soul across multiple incarnations. Perhaps you were there when the pyramid was being built. Perhaps you underwent initiation in that very chamber in some distant life. Perhaps the pull you feel toward these ancient mysteries isn't curiosity but recognition, the soul remembering what the ego has forgotten. So let me ask you the question that matters most. If the pyramid's true purpose is to facilitate consciousness expansion and direct experience of your eternal nature, if that technology still exists and could theoretically still function, what stops you from accessing it? Is it just physical distance and travel logistics? Or is it something deeper, fear of what you might discover, uncertainty about whether you're ready, doubt about whether such experiences are even possible? The pyramid builders knew that most humans would never physically enter the king's chamber, yet they built it anyway. Why? Because the real initiation doesn't require being physically present in Egypt. The real initiation is the willingness to question everything you've been taught about the nature of reality and your place within it. It's the courage to consider that death might not be what you fear, that consciousness might not emerge from brain chemistry, that you might be far more than the limited identity you carry through daily life. The empty granite box in the king's chamber is both a literal artifact and a perfect metaphor. It's empty because it was never meant to hold bodies. It was meant to briefly hold the body while the consciousness traveled elsewhere. And it remains empty, waiting across millennia for initiates prepared to use it for its actual purpose. Every time someone enters that chamber and sees only an empty stone box, the pyramid asks silently, "Are you ready to understand what I really am? Are you prepared to step beyond the comfortable lies your civilization tells itself? Can you handle the truth that you're eternal?" History got it wrong not because archaeologists are incompetent, but because they're asking questions from within a materialist framework that can't conceive of what Cayce described. When your entire worldview assumes consciousness is produced by physical brains and ceases at death, you literally cannot see a consciousness expansion technology even when you're standing inside one. The pyramid becomes invisible in its true form, perceived only as the closest thing your framework can accommodate, a very elaborate tomb. But you don't have to accept that limitation. You can look at the evidence, or rather, the striking absence of evidence for the tomb theory, and ask better questions. You can consider that ancient cultures might have possessed knowledge we've lost. You can entertain the possibility that the universe is far stranger and more consciousness-centered than modern materialism admits, and in doing so, you undergo your own initiation, not in a granite chamber in Egypt, but in the chambers of your own expanding awareness. The pyramid still stands, still silent, still keeping its secrets from those who approach it with wrong questions and closed minds. But to those who approach with humility, curiosity, and readiness to have their worldview shattered, it offers the same gift it offered 12,000 years ago, proof that consciousness transcends physical form, that death is a doorway rather than an ending, and that humanity's potential is vastly greater than we've been taught to believe. If you've made it this far in this video, you're already undergoing transformation. Something in you knows that mainstream explanations don't account for the profound mystery we're confronting. That knowing is itself the beginning of initiation, the willingness to stand in uncertainty, to question authority, to trust your own sense that there's more to reality than meets the eye. Hit that like button and subscribe if this resonates with you, because we're excavating the buried truth together, and every person who joins this search strengthens our collective ability to remember what we've forgotten. The Great Pyramid wasn't built to glorify pharaohs or house corpses. It was built to remind you, yes, you specifically, that you're far more than you've been told, that death is not what you fear, and that the doorway to direct knowledge of your eternal nature has been standing open for over 10,000 years, waiting for the moment you're finally ready to walk through it. That moment might be right now,